Hey everybody, welcome back. Before I do anything, I wanted to introduce you all to my dogs. I've gotten some requests for more puppy time in the video lectures. So this is not my first dog, our middle dog, Paco. The cabin in the ranch we live at, it's not really a ranch, it's only 9 acres. We named it after him, Rancho Paco. So he loves it out here. He doesn't like being on camera though, so I'm gonna put him down. And then we have Danny. Danny is our oldest dog. She's over 9 years old, or almost 9 years old. Her birthday's coming up. She got really sick last year, but she got better now. She's wearing her blaze orange vest, so we can find her when she runs off into the woods out here, and so that a hunter doesn't mistake her for something and kill her. So this is Danny. And then we have our newest and youngest dog, Osa. We named her Osa because in Spanish, oso is bear, and she really looks like a polar bear, especially when her hair is long. I just cut her hair short. I also have these little things on here, which you attach a little sensor to them, and it tracks where they are because she runs off all the time. If she sees a deer or a possum or anything, she just will run miles away, so it's hard to find her. So anyways, those are the dogs. Let me let some of them out. Alright, they're probably going to bother me to come back in a second. As I explained before, my computer is down, and I'm on my wife's computer right now. It's actually only Saturday, but I'm going to try to put my lectures together now because my wife has to use the computer all the time during the week for virtual meetings. As I told you before, she's an administrator at UTSA, assistant dean in the library, so she's got a lot more meetings than I have to do. Good news, as I put in my announcement that you should have all gotten via Blackboard, my computer is finally, looks like it's going to be fixed probably on Tuesday, so I'll be able to go pick it up. And I haven't made a lecture with my wife's computer for y'all yet, but I did for the other class, and there were some problems. It froze up. It's not powerful enough to use iMovie to splice in slides from PowerPoints. So this is just going to be me talking. I will upload the PowerPoints in the exact form that I'm using to do this lecture right now. So you can look at those before, after, or during. And that should help you to kind of orient yourself as you're watching these videos. I had a few other things to say about the videos in the announcement, so please go look at that. Also, it looks like everybody's doing well on the test. I just got my first question about it. Somebody who said it recorded them as like taking 44 hours to take the test, which is just crazy, some weird glitch. But if you run into any problems with that, just email me. It looks like a lot of you have done it and done well on it without any problems, with plenty of time to spare. But please do email me if there's an issue. We'll work it out. Don't worry about it. Technology is difficult. So we are done with the Amazonia section of this class, and now we head back to the United States. Based on all your feedback from the discussion board, by the way, that extra credit discussion board, please continue to give me feedback on it because I've listened to it and I'm making some changes. Something I mentioned in the announcement is that a small minority of people seem to be happy with the video lectures. You can watch them on your own time. And that really works for folks. But a few people really do want synchronous video live sessions. So I'm going to try to do that hopefully on Thursday via Blackboard Collaborate. Not mandatory, it's optional. So you can join the room and we'll have a chance to like sit and talk and as if we're in class. And it'll be kind of like office hours too. I'm not going to have anything planned. Just going to take questions and we'll listen to each other. Something else I mentioned on the announcement is that there's a function when you're in Blackboard and you're posting on a discussion board, there's a little key up at the top where like the font stuff is and everything that says mashup, and you press that and then you select something called medial, and that will actually film you doing a webcam video for your response to a discussion board rather than having to write something out. And to me, that sounds fun. I'd love to see your faces. I think everybody would love to see each other's faces. It just makes it feel much more like a discussion. It's not required, but give it a try. It could be really, really interesting. And as always in this class, no shame. We all make mistakes. We don't like the way we look on camera. We get nervous, but just give it a try. I really want to see what happens. So all of this will be explained again in more detail, and I'll finally have the final syllabus up, and that's stuck on my hard drive on the computer that's in the shop, which is why I can't do it now. The one big change I made is that we have cut out, unfortunately, that last book, Privilege, which is a great book, but there's just too much reading. And the majority of folks said they would like to slow things down a little bit. So we're going to spend the rest of the semester actually talking about Arlie Hochschild's Strangers in Their Own Land, and I'm going to talk about the preface in chapter 1 of that book today. It is a fabulous book. It's about extremely conservative people in South Louisiana, and the tie-in to the other material is that this is also a landscape these people live on that's extremely contaminated by the petroleum and the petrochemical industry. So it's very much, in many ways, close to what's happening in Doreno for Kofan people. You have people dying of cancer. The lands that they love are being destroyed by the petrochemical industry. These are also people who live very close to the land. They love to hunt. They love to fish. But they're Americans, and they're very conservative. A few things about this book. I think Arlie Hochschild does a great job of being very generous and understanding. A few other folks in past years have said they felt like she belittled these people. I don't get that at all, but if that comes up, please share it with me in discussion boards. And, you know, this book is tough because we're talking about us, and I'm assuming we have a very politically diverse classroom. So I want everybody to be very tolerant. I want you to try to be an anthropologist and try to understand people, even if they have perspectives that are very different from your own. Arlie mentions this stuff, and we'll talk about that today, some quotes about scaling the empathy wall. But I also realize some of you might be in positions where you feel like you or your family are being attacked by these people, traumatized or hurt. And hence, I don't want to ask you, to really empathize too much if you feel like these people are actively trying to make your own life harder. So do what you can, try to be as sensitive as you can. I don't want any name calling. I'm really afraid this one will be hard without me facilitating and mediating discussions. But try to be a good anthropologist. For those folks who are very liberal, left, communist, socialist, whatever, know who the people you're trying to convince are. Really try to understand them. Even if you view them as your enemy, there's no way to, change the mind of your enemy without actually understanding what their minds are like. And this book really tries to get into it. For the conservative folks in the class, I'd love to have you voice your conservative opinions. Something I've seen with this book in the past is that these are very specific people. They are conservative Americans, but they're from South Louisiana. Many of them are Cajun. So people feel like by reading this book, we're talking about, Republicans or conservatives in general in this country. And that's not at all the case. Although they are representative of a lot of conservative currents in U.S. culture. So if you're conservative, don't feel like you're being attacked through these descriptions. It's about these people in particular. And I've had some great conversations with conservative students. They didn't feel comfortable in class describing themselves as conservatives, but they would come and talk to me in office hours and share authors and videos. And I think something I said from day one is I'm really interested in conservative politics and conservative culture. I listen to conservative talk radio all the time. I watch Fox News. I'm not a conservative person, but I've just got that instinct of an anthropologist. And I like to understand people who are different from me. I've got conservative family members. I have total respect for those positions. So there's no judgment. I'm not trying to change anybody's politics or morals. And I will really respect you no matter what your politics are. I just ask you to respect each other maximally. It's a little hard with a class like this, but I think we can do it. So the first 2 chapters of Arlie Hochschild's book. As you'll see here, I have a discussion board prompt. I think we did this with our one lecture already, a change I made is that I want everybody on the discussion boards to respond to the same prompt, so that we don't have a bunch of random reading responses and a coherent discussion doesn't develop. And something I also mentioned in my announcement today is that I'm not quite sure some of you got it the first time. You don't have to post your own thread. You can just do your participation by responding to somebody else's thread. You get your full credit, that ultimately, ends up being 30% of your grade for participating in any way. I would love to see you do your own threads. I would love to see you write more. I'd love to see you do your own thread and then reply to 10 other people's threads. That's how a good discussion happens. And this stuff is very close to our hearts. This is our country. These are our politics. These are our fights. And I'm kind of an optimist in general. I feel like if we could really listen to each other and understand each other, we could make sure this country gets better. And we're in this moment right now where people are in their bubbles and they really don't understand where the other side is coming from. And I think that's a tragedy. And anthropology is about bridging these gaps. Go back to what Ruth Behar said on day one, learning to listen to each other across difference. So in the discussion board prompt, originally I was going to ask you to tell me about your own politics, to know what this class is like, what kind of mixtures of views we have. And if you are uncomfortable describing your own politics or political perspective, you might be conservative, Republican, Democratic, leftist, or independent. I asked you, to tell me what most of your friends and family's politics are like. But instead of doing that, I wanted to have you do something else for the discussion board. So there's a video I want you to watch. It's by Al Jazeera, which is a news outlet that's actually heavily associated with the government in Qatar. But they do some really, really good international reporting. They're a really good news station in a lot of ways. I mean, they push certain viewpoints, but much of their material is better than what you see on the mainstream media in the United States, from my opinion. So they have this nice 20-minute clip called Politics, Religion, and the Tea Party, Fault Lines. And that is on YouTube, and I'd like you to watch that. It really talks about what the Tea Party is, this very conservative movement that arose not too long ago here in the United States, I think mainly during the Obama administration, and is still very popular and very powerful, although Donald Trump kind of changed that all a little bit. This book, by the way, was written before Trump came to power, but just when he was starting to get into politics. And I think Arlie Hochschild does a great job explaining the appeal of Donald Trump to a huge section of Americans. People in South Louisiana feel like they've been mocked and belittled by so much of the country, by the coastal and urban elites. So when they have a chance to align themselves with somebody who is saying, no, you are great people, and those people who are mocking you, they should be mocked. She does a good job kind of describing the kind of experiences and beliefs that would make these people feel that way. So I think it's a great account of how Donald Trump got elected and why he still appeals to many people. It's also about something else that's very, very relevant right now that I'll talk about in a second. So after you watch this clip on YouTube, I want you to go onto the discussion board, and I think I'll open it at the usual time, Tuesday morning. The reason some people have had problems with discussion board because they go in to contribute and it's already closed. Now, I don't want to leave them open forever because I want, by the time I do a next lecture, to see what people have already said about a chapter or the chapters before, so I can use that in my lectures. If I left them open all the time and allowed you to contribute whenever you wanted to, I wouldn't have anything to go on, wouldn't help me to figure out where y'all are at. And then somebody could just go at the very end and put in little, contributions, in mid-May or May 8th or whatever. By the way, you'll be hearing soon that you'll have a credit, no credit option for this class. And I think by May 8th, every one of you will be able to decide whether you want a grade for this class or whether you'd rather just get it for credit or no credit. We can talk about that later. I think it's going to come down officially from the administration soon. You've heard about it, but the exact policy hasn't been announced. So anyways, after you watch this video, I want you to accomplish a task, to write something or record something via Medial, a video response to this task. So list 2 possible reasons why it's difficult for many Americans, from your perspective, to relate to Tea Party activists, very conservative activists, as a cultural anthropologist would, i.e., as a methodological relativist who puts their own moral and political perspectives on hold in order to understand how these people view the world and what makes them feel like they're living good, decent lives that are helpful to others. Hochschild, in her book, describes liberal people's inability to understand people like Tea Party activists. She describes it as a failure to climb over what she calls the empathy wall. Why do so many American liberals, you think, or just kind of mainstream Americans, why can't they try to understand Tea Party folks in the same that I would, let's say as a cultural anthropologist? What is it that makes it hard for us to look at somebody whose politics are very different and just really try to listen and understand and be generous? And that point of methodological relativism, right? Assume that what these people are doing, according to their own cultural logic, is understandable, is moral, is compassionate, is good. It's really a different culture. So that's the way I try to understand everybody. As an anthropologist, whether they're Wari people, eating their dead, or Kofan people trying to figure out what oil is and how to resist it, and then inviting it back into their communities, as we talked about. How the hell do you understand that? As an anthropologist, you try to understand the logic behind their perspective. Why is it hard for many Americans to do that across political lines? Something Hochschild mentions in this book is that there's a huge proportion of people in this country who say they'd be extremely unhappy if one of their children married somebody who was a Republican, if that person was a Democrat, or a Democrat, if that person was a Republican. It used to be much higher. The parents would be uncomfortable if their children married somebody of another race. Now it's much more common to say you would disapprove of a marriage if your child marries somebody from a different political persuasion. We just can't listen. We can't understand. So why is it so hard for Americans to do that? And as I mentioned at the beginning, it might be because, you're angry. You have relatives and you feel like the policies put into place by a Republican administration are really hurting people, or putting them in jail, or kicking them out of the country. So you're like, I shouldn't have to try to feel empathy for them. I don't. They're my enemy. And that might be a good response that you could include on the discussion board. But I just want to try to get a sense of maybe why it's hard for even us as anthropologists or anthropology students to do this, just to start thinking about this book and open up our minds a little bit, or explain why we just can't do it. So Arlie Hochschild, this is the next slide. She's an emeritus professor of sociology at the University of California at Berkeley. She is an ethnographer. Something I mentioned early on was that nowadays a lot of sociologists are basically cultural anthropologists. Anthropology created ethnography. We created participant observation research. Those are our methods. But now some sociologists are using those methods to understand not non-Western cultures, but people in Western societies. But the lines have become so much blurrier. Sociologists used to just use much larger scale techniques to understand complex, huge societies like the US. Used to use a lot of surveys and statistics and stuff. But now a lot of them are doing kind of more microscopic work, living in small communities, working with small groups of people, or even individuals, kind of stuff I do. Arlie Hochschild does kind of that work. She's done a lot of other research. She's very famous, very well-known, great researcher in my opinion. Some of her earlier projects focused on the outsourcing of jobs in America, ethnographies of flight attendants, of bill collectors, working parents, the culture of workaholism. What does it mean to be a workaholic? And then she went outside of the U.S., or people who moved in and out of the U.S., surrogate mothers in India, and nannies from the Philippines. So she's done a lot of stuff. She's a really good ethnographer. She tells you very straight up in this book, she is a progressive liberal. She lives in Berkeley, one of the most liberal cities in this country. She's not trying to hide her politics, and she explains her politics to the people she works with. But she also really, I think, comes across as a genuine, kind, understanding person. Hey, I'm different from you, but I really want to understand where you're coming from, because people like me and my friends, we don't know, and I want them to understand so we can empathize with each other a little bit more and maybe come together to solve some of these problems. She also mentions that it really helps that she's an older lady. She's not threatening. She got gray hair. She seems slight. And especially in places like the South, in Louisiana or Texas, you see an older lady and you just got to be kind of hospitable and kind towards them. Whereas if it were somebody like me going in and talking to conservatives and I say I was very leftist, there might be a lot more antagonism. Might be harder to form a rapport. But for her biography, the way she looks, it makes it easier. And anthropologists have to use these things. You have to use whatever you can, not in a deceptive way, but in a way that helps you to build good, trusting, close relationships with people so they give you genuine answers about how they feel. This book, too, Strangers in Their Own Land, was extremely well received and popular. It was a finalist for the U.S. National Book Award. When's the last time an ethnography became a finalist for the highest book award in the country? So a lot of people have read it outside of academia. This is the kind of book I would suggest, you tell your family members about, your parents, your friends, your grandparents, and see what they say too, whether they're conservative or liberal. One of the great things Hochschild did in this book is she shared her material and her thesis and her central findings with conservative folks that she worked with. And they said to her, you nailed it. You got us right. You got it. How we feel, you really spelled it out. And to my mind, that's the best testament for good ethnography. When the people you're writing about say, yeah, you did it exactly right, there's something there. So this is really good material on how a large section of our population feels. And I just think it's really well written. Stylistically, it's like a model for me. Nice, short sentences, rich descriptions, telling stories through concrete individuals like I tried to do with, Alejandro and Lucia and Roberto and Eduardo Mandua and Toribio. Arlie does this through a lot of people in this book too. Thankfully, we can go over it a little bit more slowly. So we'll read 2 chapters. There are a lot of short chapters and it's easy reading. But if we were going to do the last book, we'd have to read like 3 chapters a day, and that's too much. So Hochschild's research as an ethnographer, she based herself in the city of Lake Charles, Louisiana, which she calls, quote, ground zero for the production of American petrochemicals. This is a city where you have a lot of polluting industries based, and all the areas around Lake Charles are heavily contaminated, almost in ways like Doreno is heavily contaminated, some cases perhaps even worse. So we learn a lot about, not only environmental destruction here, but also things like cancer and health problems. So she met a liberal person there, and that liberal person and her conservative friend helped Hochschild to meet other conservative people, especially Tea Party activists, to contribute and to be part of her study. She formed 4 focus groups, 2 with liberal people and 2 with Tea Party activists or Tea Party sympathizers. I don't do focus groups. It doesn't make sense in co-found culture to get like 4 people together who aren't in the same family. Something a lot of ethnographers do, not just interviews, not just an observation, but focus groups. You get a group of people together and kind of steer a conversation. It's also a qualitative research method you see in things like advertising and political polling. Once again, those are fields that as a cultural anthropology major, you'd be well suited for because you learn those techniques as an anthropologist. And then she did follow-up interviews after those focus groups with Tea Party identifying folks and their larger social circles. She also did interviews with public officials. We'll see some of them. One of them that she writes about, General Honoré. He's interesting. I think he's what she calls a bridge builder because he's a Cajun guy, but he's also African-American. He's a decorated war hero, but he's also an environmentalist. And he's really right now involved in, trying to get FEMA to handle COVID-19 well. Really amazing guy. And we'll see some videos of him. She has like a whole chapter about General Honoré, this guy from Louisiana. As a participant observation researcher, she also went to all sorts of Tea Party public meetings, events. She identified individuals and shadowed them, followed them throughout their everyday lives, right? I went hunting with Alejandro. I cleaned clothes with Lucia. This is what she did with Tea Party activists in Louisiana, right? You're an ethnographer. You participate and you observe. So she followed them throughout their daily activities and kind of talked to them informally as she was doing that. Not recorded interviews, but taking notes. Exactly the same kind of stuff I do in my work. And her research revolved around what she calls a keyhole issue. What she means by that is like one central issue or question that gets at the heart of what she's interested in and expand out from there. So for her, the keyhole issue in South Louisiana, in these communities, especially with Tea Party activists, the question was, how much, if at all, do these people think government should regulate industrial polluters? So that was the main issue she was focused in. How did people feel about that? And through that, she got into these larger questions and themes in these people's lives. As I said before, in this book, Hochschild said she's trying to scale the empathy wall. A quote from page 5, and this is on the PowerPoint. In a period of political tumult, conflict, we grasp for quick certainties. We shoehorn new information into ways we already think. We settle for knowing our opposite numbers from the outside. But is it possible, without changing our beliefs, to know others from the inside, to see reality through their eyes, to understand the links between life, feeling, and politics? That is, to cross the empathy wall. I thought it was, i.e. she thought it was possible to do that. So being a progressive liberal from Berkeley, without giving up her politics, her values, or beliefs, can she really try to inhabit the position of a Tea Party activist and really understand how they feel about the world? Once again, seeing from another perspective, that's what anthropology is all about. And, in many ways, her culture in Berkeley is just as different from that of Tea Party activists in South Louisiana as Kofan culture is from Wari culture, and all sorts of things. I mean, the same country, but as I've said at the very beginning, every community, every group has their own culture, right? Group relative modes of thinking, speaking, acting, and feeling. Hochschild's very interested in emotion in this book and emotional connections and politics. So Hochschild is a methodological relativist, right? The point is not to accept a different kind of person's perspective, but to really give them the benefit of the doubt such that you can understand it. And then if you're going to disagree with it, do it because you really understand it, not based on outside stereotypes or misconceptions. Really try to understand. And she's against ethnocentrism, right? She wants us to understand how other people see the world so that we know that our way of seeing things is just one possibility. And as I said before, I just included this question here, why do we have such a hard time getting over the empathy walls that separate us from people who don't agree with our politics? The figure I mentioned before, a lot of people, obviously race is so important in our country. Race associates with community and cultural differences. A lot of people see racial difference as less of an issue than political difference in determining who they're married or who their kids are married. And in many ways, that's awesome. Racial justice is great. We've gotten so far, although we have so far to go. But now we have this massive political polarization. That's a huge problem in our country. And she wants to understand, why can't we talk across these divides? In this book, she also focuses on what she calls the great paradox. And by that, she means, why do so many people who could really benefit from government support or government regulation, why do they think in such negative ways about the government? Why are people in Louisiana, many of whom are poor, they live in extremely toxic landscapes, they get sicknesses from environmental contamination, and they already get a lot of goods from the federal government, right? 44% of Louisiana's state budget comes from the federal government. It's one of these things that people don't know. The states that get most from the federal government relative to what they pay in tend to be red states, conservative states. They rely more on federal aid than than blue states like New York or California. So these people are already getting a lot of resources from the federal government, and the federal government could help them to make their lives better from Hochschild's perspective by creating rules to keep companies from destroying their lands and giving them sicknesses. So it's a paradox. Why do you hate that which could make your life better? And that focus is on government, and the problem that she focuses on that these people need to confront is environmental destruction and contamination. It's not just about conservation. It's about sickness and health. Another, misunderstanding that I like to confront liberals with is, you know what the largest conservation organization in the United States is? It's not the Sierra Club. It's not World Wildlife Fund. It's not the Nature Conservancy. It's Ducks Unlimited. It's a hunting organization that tends to be rather conservative. They put more money and work into conserving habitat than these environmental kind of liberal organizations. So there's all these things these people love. They love the forest, they love the woods, they love the lakes, they love the rivers. Sure, they hunt, but they love wild spaces. They don't want them to be destroyed. So she's just interested in well, if you want that, why don't you want more government in your life to fight off these giant corporations that are making your lives worse and destroying what you love? She can't get that. It's the same kind of great question you begin an ethnographic book with, like Beth Conklin's question, why do people eat their dead? Especially, when they consider this dead flesh to be so contaminating and so awful. It's a riddle, right? Just like my riddle, why did people whose lives were destroyed by oil companies invite the oil company back in? Same kind of thing. And Hochschild calls this the great paradox. So she wants to know why conservative people who live in the most industrial, contaminated parts of America are extremely resistant to government regulation of the industries that are really harming them and killing them and destroying the lands that they love. And this is particularly relevant now because a lot of the folks who hate the idea of big government are dealing with a pandemic. And in many ways, it seems like only big government can solve this crisis, right? Only a federally funded and organized response, whether it's through payments for people who've lost their jobs, through moving medical equipment around, through more or less both suggesting and maybe forcing certain protocols. Only through that can we survive this crisis. So people, once again, and a lot of these problems are really, the coronavirus is really bad in conservative areas, also in liberal areas like New York City, but in the South, they're beginning to develop. So what are these people going to say about that? They've always hated big government, but now it seems like maybe big government can help them. Is that going to change their minds about government, or is it not? It'll be really interesting to see what comes out of this crisis, and Hochschild's book will really help us to think about that. And then in chapter 1, we see one of the first concrete individuals that she'll continue to follow throughout this book. His name's Mike Schaff. He's a white dude, 64 years old, extremely conservative. He's a Tea Party activist, and he loves guns, hunting, and freedom, right? So when you think of a really conservative, rural, white, older man, this is Mike Schaff. Grew up extremely poor, had 6 siblings, a single working parent in a very small town. Interestingly, that small town in Louisiana was 75% Black or African American. And according to Mike Schaff, there was a lot of racial harmony there. Now, Louisiana is different too. There's a lot of Creole people in Louisiana, people who are extremely racially mixed. Once again, that's a reason to realize this is a very specific community we're thinking of. And some of the same issues that you might see in other states are a little bit different in Louisiana. And just the fact that the white people there are also Cajun. They were persecuted people who fled Canada hundreds of years ago and then moved into the swamps, and many of them still speak their own language, right? So very conservative, white Americans, but with their own culture. So don't forget that, right? As anthropologists, we need to be attuned to cultural specificity. So Mike Schaff used to construct offshore oil platforms. He worked in the oil industry. And, like many of the folks we'll see in this book, he has this kind of romantic idea of the past where everybody was friendly, everybody helped each other, but then big government came and ruined all that. One of the themes that we'll see throughout this book is there's this conservative affirmation of the idea of voluntary giving, voluntary charity through church, through family, through community. But once big government takes things from you, via taxes, and then gives them to somebody else, well, where's the morality in that? You're not choosing to do that. How can you be a good person for paying taxes? Because you're forced to. Whereas if you choose to help people, it means it's much more Christian. It's much more ethically good. That's an interesting argument. So he favors obviously a kind of voluntary and moral safety net versus a forced government safety net. Very conservative guy, worked in the oil industry, and then lo and behold, one day, because of oil industry bad action, there was a huge sinkhole in his community, and it caused him to lose his home and his land. But he's still against government regulation, and he's still pro-oil and pro-company. And once again, you just got to think, how could this be? Well, Hochschild tries to help us understand. A quote on page 6 from Mike Schaff. I'm pro-life, pro-gun, pro-freedom to live our own lives as we see fit, so long as we don't hurt others. And I'm anti-big government, Mike said. Our government is way too big, too greedy, too incompetent, too bought, and it's not ours anymore. We need to get back to our local communities like we had at Armalise. That was the poor community he grew up in. Honestly, we'd be better off. This is a guy whose life has just been destroyed through corporate malfeasance. And here he is saying government's to blame, not the corporations. So let's think about that and have that question in mind as we read the rest of the book. So anyways, I'm going to put this up. Like I said, no slides will be spliced in. Won't be able to increase the volume, but hopefully this will help you enough through the first couple chapters of this book. And then we'll dig into more for Thursday. So thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.